Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the exploration ship New Horizon, staring at the message that had just arrived. He read it 3 times before he could believe what it said. The transmission came directly from the Zephyrian Empire and not from some low-level official. It was from Queen Lyrilleth herself. "Captain," his communications officer called out, "the message is confirmed authentic. The quantum signature matches all our records of official Zephyrian communications." Jake rubbed his jaw and looked around the bridge. His crew was watching him with curious faces. Nobody had expected this. The Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy as proud warriors. They rarely spoke to other species, and when they did, it was usually to deliver ultimatums or declare war. "Read it again, Commander Phillips," Jake said to his first officer. Ryan Phillips cleared his throat and began reading from his tablet. "To Captain Morrison of the human vessel New Horizon. I am Queen Lyrilleth of the Zephyrian Empire. I request a diplomatic meeting at the neutral station Crossroads Alpha. The future of our peoples may depend on this conversation. I will arrive in 3 standard days. Please confirm your attendance." The bridge fell silent. Jake could hear the soft hum of the ship's engines and the quiet beeping of various instruments. His crew was waiting for his decision, but he already knew what he would do. "This was too important to ignore. Send a reply," Jake said. "Tell the Queen we will be there." 2 days later, Jake stood in the briefing room with his senior staff. Dr. Lisa Carter, their xenobiologist, had prepared a detailed presentation about the Zephyrians. She stood at the front of the room with a holographic display showing the anatomy of a typical Zephyrian. "The Zephyrians are reptilian humanoids," Dr. Carter explained. "They average 7 feet in height and are covered in scales that can change color. These scales are not just for decoration. They respond to emotional states, environmental conditions, and even social interactions." Jake studied the hologram. The Zephyrian figure was impressive, with a strong build and scales that seemed to shimmer even in the static display. "What do we know about their culture?" asked Maya Johnson, their cultural liaison officer. "They value strength, honor, and directness," Dr. Carter replied. "They consider lengthy negotiations a sign of weakness. They prefer clear, honest communication over diplomatic dancing around issues." "That should suit the captain just fine," Ryan Phillips said with a small smile. "He's never been one for fancy speeches." Jake ignored the comment and focused on the hologram. "Tell me more about these scales. You said they change color?" "Yes." Dr. Carter nodded. "The scales shift based on various factors. Anger tends to produce reds and oranges. Calm states show blues and greens. Fear creates darker colors. However, we don't have complete data on all the color combinations and their meanings. Is there anything we should avoid doing?" Maya asked. "Absolutely," Dr. Carter said firmly. "Never touch a Zephyrian's scales without explicit permission. It's considered one of the worst insults possible. Some sources suggest it could even be grounds for a challenge to combat." Jake made a mental note of that information. The last thing he wanted was to start an interstellar incident because of a cultural misunderstanding. The next day, Jake and his team arrived at Crossroads Alpha. The neutral station was a marvel of engineering, designed to accommodate dozens of different species. The diplomatic section had been specially modified for the meeting. Between humans and Zephyr, Jake walked through the station's corridors with his team. Ryan Phillips and Maya Johnson flanked him, while Dr. Carter carried her medical scanner and notepad. The station's administrator, a tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms, guided them to the meeting chamber. "The Zephyrian delegation arrived 1 hour ago," the administrator said in accented but clear English. "Queen Lyrilleth requested a few minutes to prepare before your arrival." They entered a large crystalline chamber with walls that seemed to shift between transparent and opaque. The room's environmental controls had been set to accommodate both human and Zephyrian needs. The temperature was warmer than Jake preferred, but not uncomfortably so. "Remember," Maya whispered, "let her speak first. It's a sign of respect." Jake nodded and took his position at one end of the chamber. His team arranged themselves behind him in a loose formation. They waited in silence for several minutes. Then the doors at the far end of the chamber opened. Queen Lireleth entered with 4 members of her royal guard. Jake had seen pictures and video recordings of Zephyrians before, but seeing the queen in person was completely different. She stood at least 7 feet tall, with scales that covered her entire visible body. The scales seemed to shimmer and shift even as Jake watched, moving between deep emerald and royal blue colors. She wore what appeared to be ceremonial armor, though Jake suspected it was also functional. Her movements were graceful and controlled, like a predator that was completely comfortable in its own skin. Her eyes, a bright golden color, fixed on Jake immediately. "Captain Morrison," she said, her voice carrying easily across the chamber. "I am Queen Lireleth. Thank you for accepting my invitation." "Your Majesty," Jake replied with a slight bow. "The honor is ours. May I present my senior staff?" He introduced Ryan, Maya, and Dr. Carter. The Queen acknowledged each of them with a nod, but her attention kept returning to Jake. He noticed that her scales seemed to shift slightly when she looked at him, though he couldn't identify the specific colors. "Please be seated," the Queen said, gesturing to chairs that had been arranged in the center of the chamber. As they took their seats, Jake found himself studying the Queen's scales more closely. They were fascinating, constantly shifting. In subtle ways, the changes seemed to follow patterns, though he couldn't decipher their meaning. "Captain Morrison," the Queen said, "I requested this meeting because the Zephyrian Empire stands at a crossroads. We have watched your species expand through this sector of space. You are different from other species we have encountered." "Different? How?" Jake asked. "Most species either fear us or seek to conquer us," she replied. "Your people seem to do neither. You explore, you trade, you negotiate. But you do not seem driven by the need to dominate." Jake leaned forward slightly. "We've learned that the galaxy is large enough for many different peoples. Conquest creates enemies. Partnership creates allies." The Queen's scales shifted again, this time taking on warmer tones. "An interesting philosophy. Tell me, Captain, what do you know of our people?" "We know you're warriors," Jake said honestly. "We know you value strength and honor. We know you've built a powerful empire through courage and determination. But we also know there's more to the Zephyrian people than warfare." "Most beings see only the warrior," the Queen said quietly. "They assume that is all we are." Jake found himself genuinely curious about this powerful woman sitting across from him. Her scales continued their subtle shifting, and he wondered what caused the changes. Were they voluntary or automatic? Did they reflect her emotions or something else entirely? "Your Majesty," Jake said, "may I ask you something that might seem unusual?" "Speak freely, Captain." "Your scales," Jake said, gesturing slightly. "They're constantly changing. I'm curious, does that cause any discomfort? Do they ever ache from all that shifting?" The question seemed to surprise everyone in the room. Dr. Carter shot Jake a worried look, while Maya appeared to be holding her breath. The Queen's royal guard tensed slightly, but the Queen herself did something unexpected. Her scales flushed a warm golden color, and what could only be described as a blush spread across her features. "They do ache sometimes," she admitted, her voice softer than before. "Especially when someone watches them change the way you do." Jake felt the atmosphere in the room shift. This was no longer just a formal diplomatic meeting. Something more personal had entered the conversation. "Only when you stare like that," the Queen added, her golden gaze meeting Jake's directly. The words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning that neither of them fully understood yet. Jake realized that this meeting was going to be far more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The formal negotiations began the next morning in the same crystalline chamber. Jake sat across from Queen Lireleth with trade agreements and diplomatic papers spread between them. The Queen had brought her own advisors, including a stern-looking Zephyrian with dark red scales who introduced himself as General KORVA-SH. Dr. Carter observed from the side of the room, her scanner quietly recording data about Zephyrian physiology. She had spent the entire night analyzing the previous day's readings, and what she found troubled her. The Queen's scale patterns were unlike anything in their databases. The mining rights to the Kepler system, General Corvash was saying, his voice harsh and commanding. The Zephyrian Empire requires exclusive access to the rare metals found there. Jake looked at the star charts displayed on the room's main screen. The Kepler system sat right in the middle of several important trade routes, giving the Zephyrians exclusive rights would cut off human merchants from profitable shipping lanes. That's a problem, Jake said calmly. Those routes are used by dozens of species. Closing them would hurt a lot of innocent traders. General Kovash's scales darkened to a deep crimson. Innocent traders do not concern the Empire. Strength takes what it needs. Queen Lireleth raised one scaled hand and Corvash fell silent. Immediately. Her scales had shifted to a cooler blue-green color. Perhaps we can find a compromise, she said, looking directly at Jake. What would your people consider fair? Jake appreciated her willingness to negotiate. Most of the other species they had dealt with either demanded everything or offered nothing. The Queen seemed genuinely interested in finding solutions that worked for both sides. Joint mining operations, Jake suggested. Zephyrian workers and human technology. We share the profits and the responsibility. General Corvash started to object, but the Queen silenced him with a look. Her scales had warmed to a golden color that Jake was beginning to recognize. An interesting proposal, the Queen said. Continue. They spent the morning working through various trade agreements. Jake found himself watching the Queen's scales more than he should have. Every time she considered a new idea, they shifted, through different colors. When she agreed with something, they warmed. When she disagreed, they cooled. It was like reading her thoughts through her skin. Dr. Carter noticed his fascination and made careful notes. The Queen's scale patterns were definitely responding to Captain Morrison differently than to anyone else in the room. When the captain spoke, her scales took on warmer, brighter colors. When others talked, they remained neutral or even dimmed. Slightly, during a break in the negotiations, Jake found himself alone with the Queen on the observation deck. The deck offered a spectacular view of the nebula outside the station, with swirling clouds of purple and gold gas stretching across space. It's beautiful, the Queen said, standing beside him at the large viewing window. It is, Jake agreed. Though I think I prefer watching things that are alive and changing. The Queen turned to look at him, and her scales shifted to that warm golden color again. You speak strangely for a diplomat, Captain Morrison. I'm not really a diplomat, Jake admitted. I'm an explorer. I became a captain because someone had to make the hard decisions, but I'd rather be discovering new things than negotiating. Over old ones? What would you discover about my people if you could? The Queen asked. Jake thought about the question seriously. I want to know what you dream about. What makes you laugh? What you do when no one is watching and you don't have to be a queen. The Queen's scales cycled through several colors Jake had never seen before, shifting from gold to silver to something that looked almost like starlight. Most beings want to know about our military strength or our technology, she said quietly. You ask about dreams, military strength fades, Jake said. Technology becomes outdated. But dreams and hopes and the things that make a person who they are, those last forever. The Queen moved closer to the viewing window, her reflection mixing with the nebula's light. I dream of a time when my people don't have to prove their strength to survive, when we can create instead of conquer. That sounds like a good dream, Jake said. Do you think it's possible? She asked, turning to face him fully. Jake looked at her scales, now shifting through gentle blues and greens. I think anything is possible if the right people work together to make it happen. Before the Queen could respond, Ryan Phillips appeared on the observation deck, his face grim. Captain, he said urgently, we've received an emergency transmission. From Earth Command. There's been an attack on the human colony at New Geneva. Jake felt his stomach drop. New Geneva was home to over 2 million civilians, including families of many Starfleet personnel. What kind of attack? Jake asked. Zephyrian ships? Ryan replied, glancing nervously at the Queen. 3 battle cruisers attacked the orbital platforms and destroyed 2 cargo vessels before jumping away. Jake looked at Queen Lyrilleth, whose scales had gone completely gray. The color drained from them so quickly it was like watching a light being switched off. "I had no knowledge of this attack," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. General Corvash chose that moment to arrive on the observation deck. His scales were bright red with satisfaction. "Your Majesty," he said with a formal bow, "I have received word that our forces have successfully demonstrated Zephyrian strength to the humans. The colony's defenses proved inadequate." The Queen spun to face her general, her scales now flashing between gray and deep red. "You ordered an attack without my permission?" "The Empire requires strong leadership," Corvash replied, his own scales darkening. "These negotiations show weakness. I acted to preserve our honor." Jake watched the exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't just about the attack on New Geneva. This was about a power struggle within the Zephyrian Empire itself. "How many casualties?" Jake asked Ryan, though he dreaded the answer. 43 confirmed dead," Ryan replied. "Over 200 injured." Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Starting a fight now wouldn't help anyone. Queen Lyrilleth stepped between Jake and General Corvash, her scales now cycling rapidly through multiple colors. "General," she said, her voice deadly quiet, "you will return to the fleet immediately and place yourself under arrest for acting without royal authority." "I will not," Corvash replied. "The Council supports my actions. They grow tired of a queen who seeks friendship with weaklings." The insult hit its mark. The Queen's scales flashed bright red for just a moment before settling into a cold, metallic silver that Jake had never seen before. "Leave," she commanded. "Now." General Corvash bowed mockingly and left the observation deck, but not before giving Jake a look that promised future trouble. When they were alone again, the Queen turned to Jake, her scales now a deep, sad blue. "Captain Morrison," she said formally, "I offer my sincere apologies for this unprovoked attack on your people. The actions of General Corvash do not represent the will of the Zephyrian crown." Jake studied her face and her scales, looking for any sign of deception. All he saw was genuine regret and something that looked like fear. "I believe you," he said finally. "But this changes everything, doesn't it?" The Queen nodded slowly. "My authority is being challenged. There are those in the Empire who believe I am too weak to lead. This attack was designed to make me choose. Between my people and these negotiations, what will you choose?" Jake asked. The Queen looked out at the nebula again, her scales shifting through colors that seemed to reflect the cosmic clouds outside. "I don't know," she admitted. "If I defend Corvash's actions, I betray everything I believe in. If I condemn them, I may lose my throne to those who think strength means violence." Jake moved to stand beside her at the window. "There's a third option." "Which is?" "We work together to find the truth," Jake said. "Something about this attack doesn't make sense." Corvash acted too quickly, too confidently. He knew the negotiations were going well. Why risk everything for a meaningless show of force? The Queen's scales brightened slightly. "You think there's more to this than simple military insubordination?" "I think someone wanted these negotiations to fail," Jake said. "And I think they're willing to kill innocent people to make that happen." The Queen was quiet for a long moment, her scales cycling through thoughtful patterns of blue and green. "If we investigate together," she said finally, "both our peoples might see it as betrayal." "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks." The Queen turned to look at him again, and her scales warmed to that familiar golden color. "You would risk your career and your reputation to help me discover the truth?" "I would risk them to prevent more innocent deaths," Jake replied. "And?" "Yes, I would risk them to help you." The Queen's scales shifted through more colors than Jake could count, ending in a warm, bright gold that seemed to glow in the nebula's light. "Then we have work to do," she said. Jake and Queen Lyrilleth worked through the night in a secure conference room aboard Crossroads Alpha. The room was small and cramped, filled with data screens and communication equipment. Maya Johnson had helped them access the station's intelligence databases while Dr. Carter monitored Zephyrian communications channels. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to a timeline displayed on one of the screens. General Kovash's ships were already in position near New Geneva 3 days before our meeting began. He planned this attack before he even knew how the negotiations would go. Queen Lirleth studied the data, her scales shifting between thoughtful blues and angry reds. That means the attack was never about our negotiations failing. It was meant to make them fail. But why? Maya asked from her position at the communications console. What does Corvash gain by destroying the peace talks? Dr. Carter looked up from her medical scanner, which she had been using to monitor stress patterns in the Queen's scale changes. Captain, I've been analyzing the Queen's physiological responses. Her scales showed genuine surprise and distress about the attack. Either she's the best actress in the galaxy, or she really had no idea this was coming. I told you I didn't know, the Queen said, her scales flashing with irritation. I believe you, Jake said quickly, but we need to prove it to both our governments. And we need to figure out what Corvash is really planning. They spent hours going through intelligence reports, military communications, and diplomatic records. Jake learned more about Zephyrian politics in one night than human diplomats had discovered in decades. The Queen's empire was not as unified as it appeared from the outside. There are 3 main factions in the High Council, the Queen explained, her scales taking on educational patterns of green and blue. The traditionalists want to maintain our old ways of conquest and expansion. The moderates support careful growth and limited contact with other species. The progressives, my supporters, believe we should seek partnerships with other civilizations. And which faction does Corvash belong to? Jake asked. Officially, he serves the crown regardless of politics, the Queen replied. But his actions suggest he supports the traditionalists, perhaps more than I realized. Maya turned from her console with a concerned expression. I'm picking up encrypted communications between Corvash's ship and someone on the Zephyrian homeworld. The encryption is too strong for me to break, but the signal pattern suggests regular contact. Can you trace where on the homeworld the signals are going? The Queen asked. Working on it, Maya replied, her fingers dancing across the controls. Jake noticed that the Queen's scales had been shifting more rapidly as the night wore on. The constant color changes seemed to be increasing in frequency and intensity. Your Majesty, he said gently, are you feeling all right? Your scales have been very active. The Queen looked down at her arms, as if just noticing the rapid color shifts. Stress affects scale patterns. The more worried or angry I become, the more they change. It's one of the reasons Zephyrian leaders learn to control their emotions. You don't have to control them around us, Jake said. We're trying to help. The Queen's scales warmed to a soft gold. Most beings find our emotional displays disturbing. They think we're unstable or dangerous when our scales change rapidly. I think they're beautiful, Jake said honestly, like watching a sunset that never ends. The Queen's scales brightened considerably, cycling through warm golds and soft oranges. Dr. Carter made a note on her scanner, recognizing the pattern as one associated with pleasure and affection. Captain, Maya called out, interrupting the moment. I've traced the signal. It's going to the residence of Counselor Thane, the leader of the traditionalist faction. Queen Lirleth's scales immediately shifted to dark reds and blacks. Thane. I should have known. He's opposed every reform I've tried to implement. He believes the Empire is growing weak under my leadership. What kind of reforms? Jake asked. Education programs, cultural exchanges with other species, scientific research projects, the Queen replied. Things that build knowledge instead of just military power. Thane thinks they're a waste of resources. Double Quarter looked up from her scanner. Captain, I'm reading something interesting in the Zephyrian military communications. There's been a lot of unusual ship movement in the past week. Vessels being reassigned, supply convoys changing routes, personnel transfers happening without normal documentation. That sounds like someone preparing for something big, Jake said. Or preparing for civil war, the Queen added quietly, her scales now a worried gray. Maya's console beeped with an incoming message. She read it quickly, her face growing pale. Captain, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. They're demanding an immediate explanation for the attack on New Geneva, and they want to know why you're still meeting with Zephyrian representatives. Jake rubbed his face tiredly. What do they want me to tell them? They're coming home? Immediately, Maya replied. They're sending a battle group to escort you back to Earth. The Queen's scales shifted through multiple colors rapidly, ending in a deep blue that Jake recognized as sadness. So our investigation ends here, she said quietly. Not necessarily, Jake replied. How long before your government expects you back? I have perhaps 2 more days before the High Council demands my return, the Queen said. Why? Because I think we can solve this in 2 days, Jake said. But we'll have to work together, and we'll have to take some risks. Dr. Carter looked concerned. Captain, if Earth Command finds out you're still cooperating with the Zephyrians after the attack, they could court-martial you. And if the High Council discovers I'm sharing intelligence with humans, they could remove me from the throne, the Queen added. Jake looked at both women, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. 2 days ago, 43 innocent people died because someone wanted to start a war. If we don't stop this now, a lot more people are going to die. I can live with a court-martial. I can't live with letting that happen. The Queen studied Jake's face carefully, her scales shifting through several contemplative colors. You would risk everything for people you've never met, wouldn't you? Jake asked. The Queen's scales brightened to a warm gold. Yes, I would. That's why my people think I'm weak. It's not weakness, Jake said firmly. It's strength. Anyone can destroy things. It takes real courage to protect them, Maya cleared her throat. If we're going to do this, we need a plan. And we need to do it without anyone discovering what we're up to? Jake moved to the main display screen and began pulling up star charts and ship positions. Here's what I'm thinking. We know Corvash is planning something bigger than just one attack. We know he's working with Counselor Thane. We need to find out what they're planning and get proof that will convince both our governments. How do we do that? The Queen asked. We go to the source, Jake replied. We track down Corvash and find out what he's really up to. Dr. Carter looked alarmed. Captain, that's incredibly dangerous. If Corvash is planning a coup, getting close to him could get us all killed. The alternative is war between our species, Jake said. How many people die if that happens? The Queen moved to stand beside Jake at the display screen. Her scales had settled into a determined pattern of deep blues and silvers. I know where Corvash is likely to go, she said. There's a supply depot in the asteroid belt, 3 systems from here. It's off the main shipping routes, but it has everything needed to support a small fleet. If he's planning something big, he would need a staging area. That's a long way from any backup, Maya pointed out, which is exactly why it would be perfect for a secret operation, Jake replied. We go in quietly, gather intelligence, and get out before anyone knows we were there. The Queen's scales shifted to a worried gold. Captain, if we're discovered, it won't just be our careers at risk. It could mean war between our peoples. Jake looked at the Queen, noting how her scales seemed to glow in the dim light of the conference room. Do you trust me? The Queen's scales cycled through several colors before settling on a warm, bright gold. Yes, I trust you. Then let's go stop. A war, Jake said. Dr. Carter sighed and began packing her equipment. I can't believe I'm saying this, but when do we leave? As soon as we can modify a shuttle to avoid detection, Jake replied. Mayo, can you create false flight plans that will cover our absence? Already working on it, Maya said, her fingers. Flying over the controls, the Queen watched the humans prepare for their dangerous mission, her scales shifting through colors that reflected hope, fear, and something else that Dr. Carter's scanner identified as deep affection. Captain Morrison, the Queen said quietly, why are you really doing this? Jake stopped his preparations and looked at her directly. Because 43 people died, and I don't want anyone else to die because of politics and fear. Because I think your dream of peace is worth fighting for. And because I've come to care about what happens to you. The Queen's scales brightened to the most beautiful gold pattern Jake had ever seen, warm and radiant like captured sunlight. When this is over, she said softly, I would like to show you the gardens of my homeworld. They're filled with flowers that change color like my scales, but they only bloom in the presence of those they trust. The modified shuttle dropped out of hyperspace near the asteroid field where General Kravash's ships were hiding. Jake piloted the small craft carefully between the floating rocks, using their natural cover to avoid detection. Queen Lyrilleth sat beside him in the co-pilot seat, her scales a muted gray that helped her blend with the shuttle's interior. 3 ships, Dr. Carter reported from the scanner station. 2 battle cruisers and 1 command vessel. They're powered down to minimum levels, probably to avoid detection. Smart, Jake said. They're sitting dark until they're ready to move. Maya looked up from her communications equipment. I'm picking up encrypted transmissions between the ships and something deeper in the asteroid field. There might be a hidden base in there. Queen Lyrilleth studied the scanner readings with professional interest. Those are new model battle cruisers. They shouldn't be here. They were supposed to be guarding our outer colonies, which means someone with a lot of authority ordered them to this location. Jake said they spent several hours moving carefully through the asteroid field using passive scanners to map the Zephyrian positions. What they found was more alarming than Jake had expected. The 3 visible ships were just the beginning. Hidden among the larger asteroids were supply vessels, troop transports, and communication arrays. This isn't just a staging area, Dr. Carter said, her voice worried. This is a complete military base. There must be 15 ships out there. Enough for a significant attack, the Queen agreed, her scales darkening with concern. Jake maneuvered the shuttle closer to what appeared to be the command center, a hollowed-out asteroid with docking bays and communication equipment. Through the shuttle's windows, they could see Zephyrian soldiers moving around in environmental suits. Can we get close enough to tap into their communications? Jake asked Maya. Maybe, she replied. But we'd have to get very close, and if they detect us, we won't be able to outrun those battle cruisers. Do it, Jake said. We need to know what they're planning. Maya began extending a small communication probe from the shuttle's hull. The device was designed for intelligence gathering, almost invisible against the black of space. She guided it carefully toward the command asteroid while monitoring for any signs of detection. I'm getting something, she whispered, even though there was no way the Zephyrians could hear them. Multiple voice channels, all encrypted, but I can break the basic command frequencies. The first voice they heard was General Korvash, his harsh tones unmistakable even through the electronic distortion. The attack on the human colony was only the beginning, he was saying. Phase 2 begins in 18 hours. Are all ships in position? Confirmed, came another voice. Battle groups Alpha and Beta are ready. Ground forces have been briefed on their targets. Jake and Queen Lyrilleth exchanged worried glances. This was much bigger than they had imagined. What are the primary targets? Korvash asked. The human diplomatic complex on Centauri Prime, the trade station at New Marseille, and the research facility on Luna, the second voice replied. Simultaneous strikes will eliminate their ability to coordinate a response. Queen Lyrilleth's scales went completely white, a color Jake had never seen before. Those targets would kill thousands of civilians, she whispered. When do we receive confirmation from the homeworld? Korvash continued. Counselor Thane will signal us as soon as the Queen is removed from power, came the reply. The High Council is meeting tomorrow to discuss her failure to properly respond to human aggression. Once she's out of the way, we'll have full authority. To proceed, Jake felt his blood turn cold. They're planning to blame you for the attacks they're about to carry out. The Queen's scales were now cycling rapidly through colors of shock and anger. Thane is going to use the attack on New Geneva as evidence that I'm unfit to rule. Then he'll authorize these new attacks in the name of protecting the Empire. We have to stop this, Dr. Carter said urgently. How? Maya asked. We're 4 people in a shuttle against 15 warships. Jake studied the scanner readings, looking for any weakness in the Zephyrian position. We can't stop the ships, but maybe we can stop the orders. What do you mean? The Queen asked. They're waiting for confirmation from Counselor Thane before They attack, Jake explained. If we can prevent that signal from reaching them, or if we can get proof of the conspiracy to the High Council before they remove you from power, we might be able to stop this. The Queen considered this, her scales shifting through thoughtful patterns. The High Council meeting is in 14 hours. It would take us 12 hours to reach the homeworld. That doesn't give us much time, Dr. Carter pointed out. It gives. You see enough, Jake said firmly. But we'll have to leave now, and we'll have to take some big risks. As they prepared to leave the asteroid field, Maya's equipment picked up another conversation that made them all freeze. What about the Queen's human allies? Someone was asking. Captain Morrison and his team disappeared from Crossroads Alpha yesterday, Corvash replied. My sources suggest they may be investigating our operations. That's unfortunate, the other voice said. If they discover our plans before tomorrow's attacks, it could complicate things. I've already sent hunters after them, Corvash said. Casually, fast ships with experienced crews. They won't escape. Jake immediately began powering up the shuttle's engines. We need to go, now. Captain, Dr. Carter said, her voice tight with fear, I'm reading 4 small ships leaving the command asteroid. They're heading directly for us. Hang on, Jake said, pushing the shuttle's engines to maximum power. The small craft shot out. From behind the asteroid where they had been hiding, racing toward the edge of the asteroid field. Behind them, the 4 Zephyrian hunter ships gave chase, their weapons already charging. They're faster than us, Maya reported. They'll catch us before we reach hyperspace. Queen Lyrilleth moved to the shuttle's tactical station. I can help. I know Zephyrian ship systems. What can you do? Jake asked, wrestling with the controls as he dodged between asteroids. Their hunters are designed for speed, not heavy fighting, the Queen explained, her scales now bright silver with concentration. But they have one weakness. If we can overload their power systems, they'll have to shut down to prevent engine damage. How do we overload their power systems? Dr. Carter asked. The Queen's hands moved quickly over the tactical controls. By making them use all their power at once? Captain, I need you to fly directly at the largest asteroid in the field. That seems like a bad idea, Jake said, but he changed course as requested. Trust me, the Queen said, her scales warming to that. Familiar gold-colored. Jake pushed the shuttle toward a massive asteroid that was easily 10 times larger than any of the others. The 4 hunter ships followed, firing energy weapons that barely missed the shuttle's hull. Now, the Queen said, when I tell you, turn hard to port and activate your emergency boosters. The shuttle was almost at the asteroid's surface when the Queen shouted, now. Jake yanked the controls hard left and hit the emergency boosters. The shuttle shot away from the asteroid at an angle that would have been impossible to predict. The 4 hunter ships, moving at full speed and unable to change direction quickly, slammed into the asteroid one after another. Brilliant, Maya? Said with admiration. Queen Lyrilleth's scales were bright gold with satisfaction. Basic physics. Large objects in motion tend to stay in motion. Jake set course for hyperspace, but before they could jump, Dr. Carter called out in alarm. Captain, I'm reading massive energy buildup from the command ships. They're powering up their main weapons. Through the shuttle's rear window, they could see the 3 battle cruisers emerging from behind their hiding places, their hulls glowing with charged weapon systems. They're going to try to destroy us before we can report what we've learned. The Queen said. Jake's hands flew over the hyperspace controls, but the calculations would take precious seconds they didn't have. The lead ship is targeting us, Maya reported. Weapons locked, they're firing. The brilliant beam of energy shot across space toward their tiny shuttle. Jake knew there was no way to avoid it. They were going to die here, in this remote asteroid field, and no one would ever know about the conspiracy that would start a war. Then Queen Lyrilleth did something that surprised everyone. She stood up from her station and placed her scaled hand on Jake's shoulder. It has been an honor working with you, Captain Morrison, she said softly. Her scales had shifted to a color Jake had never seen before, something between gold and silver that seemed to glow with its own light. In that moment, facing certain death, she looked more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. "The honor was mine, Your Majesty," Jake replied. The energy beam struck their shuttle just as the hyperspace engines engaged. The last thing Jake saw before everything went white was the Queen's scales blazing with that impossible silver-gold light, and her eyes looking at him with an expression that needed no words to understand. When the light faded, they were gone, leaving only empty space and 4 very confused Zephyrian battlecruisers, wondering where their targets had disappeared to, but Jake and his team were not dead. The shuttle had made the jump to hyperspace just in time, though the energy blast had severely damaged their systems. The damaged shuttle limped into orbit around the Zephyrian homeworld with only minutes to spare. Jake's hands were steady on the controls despite the sparks flying from damaged systems all around them. Queen Lyrilleth sat beside him, her scales shifting between worried grays and determined blues as she prepared to face the High Council. "The council chambers are in the capital city," the Queen said, pointing to a massive structure visible from orbit. "But getting there will be difficult. Corvash will have allies watching for us." Dr. Carter looked up from her medical scanner, which she had been using to monitor the Queen's stress levels. "Your Majesty, your scale patterns are showing extreme fatigue. You need rest before facing the council." "There's no time for rest," the Queen replied, her scales flashing with urgency. "The meeting begins in 1 hour." Maya finished her work at the communication station and turned to face them. "I've sent our evidence to both Earth Command and the Zephyrian Council. The recordings of Corvash's conversations, the ship positions, everything we discovered. But I don't know if they'll believe it without independent confirmation." Jake studied the planet below them. The Zephyrian homeworld was beautiful, with purple oceans and silver cities that gleamed in the light of their orange sun. It seemed wrong that such a peaceful-looking place could be the center of a conspiracy to start an interstellar war. "We need to get you to that council meeting," Jake said to the Queen. "But once we land, we'll be on your territory. Your people might see U.S. as invaders." Queen Lyrilleth's scales warmed to a soft gold. "Not my people, Captain. You saved my life and helped me discover the truth about the conspiracy. You'll be honored guests." "If we live long enough to reach the council chambers," Dr. Carter pointed out. The Queen moved to the shuttle's communication system and began broadcasting on official royal frequencies. Her voice carried the authority of centuries of Zephyrian tradition. "This is Queen Lyrilleth, speaking to all loyal citizens of the Empire. I am returning to address the High Council on matters of critical importance to our people's future. Any who would harm my honored guests will answer directly to me." Within minutes, responses began coming in from across the planet. Some were messages of support and loyalty. Others were more troubling, suggesting that not everyone accepted the Queen's authority anymore. "The traditionalist faction has been busy," the Queen said, her scales darkening with anger as she read the messages. "They've convinced many people that I've been corrupted by human influence." Jake guided the shuttle toward the landing platform closest to the council chambers. As they descended through the atmosphere, he could see crowds gathering in the streets below. Some carried banners supporting the Queen, while others displayed the symbols of the traditionalist faction. "Your people are divided," Maya observed. "Civil war often begins this way," the Queen replied sadly, "with neighbors choosing different sides." They landed on the royal platform with a grinding of damaged metal and failing engines. The shuttle would never fly again, but it had gotten them where they needed to go. As the landing ramp lowered, Jake could see Zephyrian royal guards waiting for them, their scales formal patterns of blue and silver. Captain Vale, the head of the royal guard, approached with obvious relief. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply. "The council has been in emergency session for 2 hours. Councillor Thane has presented evidence that you've abandoned your duties to conspire with human enemies." Queen Lyrilleth's scales flashed with anger. "Has he presented evidence, or has he presented lies designed to remove me from power?" "The council will determine the truth," Captain Vale replied diplomatically. "But you should know that General Corvash arrived 1 hour ago with additional accusations." Jake felt his heart sink. Corvash had beaten them here and would have had time to prepare his version of events. We have evidence that will expose Corvash's treachery, the Queen said firmly. Clear your fastest path to the council chambers. As they moved through the palace corridors, Jake marveled at the architecture around them. The walls were made of the same crystal-like material as the meeting chambers on Crossroads Alpha, but here they seemed to pulse with internal light that responded to the emotions of those passing by. The walls react to Zephyrian biorhythms, the Queen explained, noticing his interest. They're designed to prevent deception in the sacred halls of government. Will they react to humans? Dr. Carter asked. We're about to find out. The Queen replied. They reached the entrance to the council chambers just as angry voices could be heard from within. Through the translucent doors, Jake could see dozens of Zephyrians in formal robes, their scales flashing with the colors of heated debate. Remember, the Queen said quietly, speak only truth in these chambers. The walls will expose any deception, and lies spoken here are considered sacred crimes. Jake nodded, understanding the gravity of what they were about to do. The doors opened, and Queen Lyrilleth entered with her human companions. The chamber fell silent as hundreds of Zephyrian eyes turned to look at them. Jake could see General Corvash standing near the center of the room, his scales dark red with what looked like satisfaction. Counselor Thane, an elderly Zephyrian with scales that had faded to silver with age, stood at the speaker's podium. Queen Lyrilleth, he said formally, you have been summoned to answer charges of abandoning your duty and consorting with enemies of the Empire. I have been investigating a conspiracy against the Empire, the Queen replied, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. A conspiracy led by General Corvash and supported by members of this very council. Corvash stepped forward, his scales bright with false indignation. Your Majesty speaks lies to cover her own failures. She has been corrupted by human influence and can no longer be trusted to lead our people. Jake noticed that the crystal walls around Corvash began to pulse with dark colors when he spoke. The truth-sensing walls were reacting to his deception. General Corvash, the Queen said, her scales now bright silver with authority. 3 days ago you ordered an unprovoked attack on the human colony at New Geneva. You did this without my knowledge or permission, in direct violation of your oath as a military officer. I acted to protect the Empire from human aggression, Corvash replied. But the walls around him grew darker. Queen Lyrilleth activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. These are recordings of General Corvash planning further attacks on human civilians. Attacks designed to start a war that would cost thousands of lives on both sides. The recordings played for the entire council to hear. Corvash's voice filled the chamber as he discussed targeting diplomatic facilities and research stations. The crystal walls began pulsing with bright, clear light, indicating that the recordings were genuine. This evidence was gathered through illegal cooperation with human spies, Counselor Thane protested. It cannot be trusted. Jake stepped forward, feeling the weight of hundreds of alien eyes upon him. The crystal walls around him began to glow with soft, warm light. Counselor Thane, he said clearly, I am Captain Jake Morrison of the human exploration vessel New Horizon. Everything we discovered was shared freely with Queen Lyrilleth because we believe the truth serves both our peoples better than lies and war. The walls around Jake brightened even more, and he heard murmurs of surprise from the assembled Zephyr IANS. Dr. Carter moved to stand beside Jake. I am Dr. Lisa Carter, and I can confirm that Queen Lyrilleth showed genuine distress when she learned of the attack on our colony. Her physiological responses indicated complete surprise and sincere regret. Maya Johnson was the last to speak. I am Communications Officer Maya Johnson. Our investigation revealed a military force of 15 ships hidden in the Kepler asteroid field, preparing to attack human civilian targets. This force was assembled and positioned before any diplomatic meetings took place. With each human testimony, the crystal walls grew brighter and clearer. The contrast with the dark, pulsing light around General Corvash became impossible to ignore. Counselor Thane's scales began to shift nervously as he realized his conspiracy was being exposed. This is all human manipulation, he said desperately. They've corrupted our queen and now they seek to corrupt this council. But his words caused the walls around him to pulse with the same dark colors that surrounded Korvash. Queen Lyrillith moved to the center of the chamber, her scales now blazing with the silver-gold light that Jake had seen during their escape from the asteroid field. "Members of the High Council," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "the evidence is clear. General Korvash and Councillor Thane have conspired to start a war with humanity, using the deaths of innocent beings on both sides to further their own political ambitions. I call for their immediate arrest and the recall of all military forces under Korvash's command." The crystal walls throughout the chamber erupted in brilliant light, confirming the truth of every word she had spoken. General Korvash made one last desperate attempt to seize control. "The queen has been compromised. By human influence, she is no longer fit to rule the empire." But as he spoke, the walls around him went completely black, and even the traditionalist counselors began backing away from him. Captain Vale and the royal guards moved to arrest both Korvash and Thane as they were led away. The general's scales had faded to a dull gray of defeat,